All right. So Graham Platner woke me up out of my slumber, reminding me that I need to do my annual condemnation of the Marxists.
We are suspending campaign operations. This is incredibly difficult because I know that some will think it's an admission of guilt, and it most certainly is not. We're not doing it because of the allegations, we're doing it because of the structures that are being taken away from us by those in power.
All right. So basically, girl, I know why people are confused. I know why the charade is the charade right now, but I actually would like to. I have notes. I would like to go into it because if I'm not mistaken, I did actually make a video last year talking about the same exact thing. These white Marxists, white male Marxists, and you don't always have to be a white male Marxist because the issue with Marxism, the big old hole, and I'm not the first one to say this, as I have said previously, as I have written about in this Substack post on my analysis of power, many people have pointed out since before I was even born how Marxism tends to miss Marxism, anti-capitalist stuff, a lot of the socialist, a lot of the communist spaces tend to miss the ways that white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism and compulsive heterosexuality are all interplayed. There is not a singular lens that you can look through these things. There is not a one solution fits all. There is not if we, bring in workers' rights and if we smash capitalism and bring in communism, then, we save the city. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Because there is a specific connotation attached to working class and class solidarity. Working class is a heuristic for masculinity, for manhood. Working class is a heuristic for whiteness. Um, Very rarely do people think about the history of class organization and a class consciousness and are referring to the washerwomen post-emancipation, the black women who were proliferative across the South, who were laundresses, who organized their workspaces, which were actually in their homes, because part of the organization, part of their pushback was, we will do this very arduous work of laundering white people's clothing, but we no longer will work in the home. We are not going to continue to be there because they understood that this was, for many, a very violent place to be, sexually violent, physically violent from the mistress. And they wanted days off, they wanted holidays observed. And so these women across the South, in Atlanta and in smaller cities in Tennessee, were able to come together and essentially unionize their domestic workspaces and said, we will do this work, but we will not do this work in your home. And we will do it on a timeline that best fits us. This is left out of the class conscious unionizing history. Very rarely do I hear anything about sex workers or Latina house cleaning services. Very rarely are we talking about the black and brown nurses who line the nursing homes, who are the nursing aides, and who are the licensed practical nurses who are paid less and asked to do more often than the registered nurses. These people do not enter this conversation because working class is used as a shortcut, is used as a way to say white and to say man without having to say white man. Because often when we are talking about working class, an image is conjured of a white guy in Iowa working at an Amazon warehouse for his family, and he's a provider, and he has to bring home this money for the wife and the children. But very rarely do we talk about the ways that even the wife is working in terms of these working class conversations. And Graham Platner was able to get this far because the general sentiment was we need to have a Joe Rogan on the left, and that there needs to be some sort of competent competitor to Donald Trump. Donald Trump and Joe Rogan both are men, they are white, and they have traditional markers of masculinity. Donald Trump is wealthy. And that is all we really need to say about the masculinity stuff, right? And the ways that he has amassed his wealth. I mean, the ways that anybody who is extremely wealthy has amassed their wealth has these tinges of masculinity to them. But Donald Trump is bold and boisterous, and he is unapologetically offensive and harmful. And he has a lot of money, and he's really tall, and he is clearly heterosexual, or at least that is what he portrays out into the world, right? He mans these Miss America pageants, and he is constantly touching up on women. There are many sexual assault allegations, and he talks very badly about immigrants and all of these things that are attached to masculinity. And there is constantly this push for the left to get essentially a Donald Trump or a Joe Rogan. Because caring about people is the ways that Democrats are categorized. The bleeding heart liberal. And this is a very emasculating place to be. This is a feminized place to be. And it is not taken seriously. It is not taken seriously to care about people. And so we need a manly man. Because what you're about to hear in this clip that I'm about to play is the reflections of somebody who deeply supported Platner. I mean, literally, it was their entire job to support him. And he acknowledges all of the red flags, which we will get into. Again, these are actually full stops. Very lightly, we could say these are red flags. These were big, humongous, blinking, like, this guy might be a problem, or is a problem, presents problems, is harmful. But this was able to be ignored because we need a masculine white savior. We need a Superman on the left.
Else, but I can't imagine I am alone, just given the kind of meteoric success that Graham had coming out of the gate. You know, I think that Democrats have been struggling for a long time, you know, at least since 2016, probably before then. 2016 is when it really kicked into high gear with white working class voters. Maine is a very white state. The general electorate is very, very working class, low college educated, a bit older, representative of a lot of groups that Democrats have struggled with of late and that we're looking to get back. And Susan Collins is a very formidable challenger, always overperforms her polling, her benchmarks, wins in tough environments. And I think that we, as in the people who kind of were looking for something different, looked at past nominees against Collins and wanted to try something different. An outsider, someone who could kind of appeal to white working class voters, appeal to disaffected Trump voters, independents, you know, Republicans, maybe someone who didn't fall neatly along partisan lines, you know, progressive economic populist with a, you know, but also pro Second Amendment, you know, a bit more heterodox. And here comes this guy who is, you know, on paper is perfect.
Heterodox. Outsider. The definition of heterodox.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, he was like a sharpshooter. He was an oysterman. He was like a town harbor master. He was a, you know, veteran, combat veteran, just like this gruff, like speaking voice. And I think that a lot of us, you know, I live in a fairly working class neighborhood in Brooklyn, but much different than I'd say white working class voters are in some more like Maine, particularly rural Maine. In my head, and I think in the heads of a lot of people, it's like, here comes this guy who epitomizes what we are lacking. People who can speak authentically, or what we thought was authentically, can reach beyond our traditional messaging of like a Sarah Gideon or people that have run against Susan Collins and fallen short in the past.
When the interviewee says, quote, he epitomizes what we're lacking, he is really speaking to this fixation on a white masculine savior. Because what is lacking, right? And when they're describing him, they're talking about a big, burly man, and he's heterodox, yep. Right? A white man who owns a business and has made a lot of money on killing people based off of the imperial core's need to dominate, and he's like rogue and tough, and this is somehow heterodox. This is somehow going against tradition, going against norms. Hello? Like, no, it is not, right? But what is heterodox is that he will say that he is a Democrat, he is a progressive, he's a part of the bleeding heart liberals while being masculine. That is what they are talking about when they are saying that he is the definition of heterodox. I need there to be more interrogation of working class, because when it's not interrogated, Graham Platners are what's produced, this singular focus. Again, working class is often used as a heuristic for white and men, because we say that the only dignified workers are these manual laborers who are masculine, who are men, who are bringing home money and supporting families. So much of the conversation surrounding working class is still very reliant on Christian patriarchal notions of family and work. And often, Black and brown people are written out of this because they are seen as leeches and mooches, right? The xenophobic conversation about immigrants coming to take your community resources and they're taking your jobs. And Black people are just, lazily laying about using welfare services. Black and brown people are often written outside of working class. Women are written outside of working class. So we do actually need to be more critical and ask more questions about what do you mean by working class? What do you mean by workers' solidarity? Which workers? And how are you going to address the unique intersections of being an immigrant, a migrant, agricultural worker, or being a Black nurse's aide, or being a trans woman sex worker? People, what does a class consciousness mean for the ways that power is structured throughout, which is not exclusively through capitalism? I think that might be the next step. I think that the seamless ability to ignore a history of violence, a trail of harm, speaks to the priorities of a lot of progressive spaces and organizers. Because just to briefly walk through Graham Platner's history, first we have to call into question his military service. Now, I'm a person who believes in change and believes that we should be asking what to do when harm occurs, not so much, or I think that we should be addressing the aftermath of what to do when harm occurs. Okay, so he joined the Army, right? I think it's important context to note that he was not joining out of necessity. He was not one of those people who was like, I was in foster care and I was homeless at 18. No, he was in a stable situation and dreamed of joining the military. And then 9/11 happened, and that really ignited the complete fire. He was already planning on it. This further put him in. He then signs multiple contracts. He does it again and again. And it's not just like he's a nurse or a mechanic. He signs up for a combat job. He signs up to hold the gun and to shoot the people. And he is willing to do this over and over and over again. Then he gets out and joins Blackwater as a contractor, okay? And in his reflection, he is disgruntled by his own PTSD and people who have PTSD like him. But there is no mention of the PTSD that the Iraqi and Afghanis that have lost family members due to his line of work, whose communities are completely decimated. There is no mention of their PTSD, right? That should have already been the do not cross. No, we don't need this. Because his condemnation for war is not for war in general, it's for pointless wars, which is intentionally abstract. What is a pointless war? He has no issue with being a literal foot soldier for imperialism. He just doesn't like when that does not benefit him, when the imperial core is not kind. So not kind to him, I should say. So I don't really get it. Then we have the Nazi tattoo thing. He says he didn't know it was a Nazi tattoo. Okay, we give him the benefit of the doubt. And that then brings into question, well, what environment are you immersed into where this is accessible? What tattoo parlors are you going to? What tattoo artists are you going to that aren't aware of this? Because anecdotally, I know many people who have a working knowledge of like gang symbolism and Nazi symbolism who will not tattoo that. Interesting that you were in a place where this is accessible, or the people that you were around, you saw this enough. Like if you did not come up with this on your own volition, then what environment were you in that allowed this to be a thing? I don't know. Then we get to the physically aggressive relationship. Physically aggressive is the way that this woman described the relationship. Mind you, this was a published piece prior to the political one that came out this week. There was another woman who said, this man is violent, physically aggressive. Then we have the Reddit comments, him being a rape apologist and, the black people don't tip. Oh my God. And then we arrive to the political story about another woman claiming rape. Like, huh? But we get here because we don't care, because we have a singular access. We get here because you are primarily concerned with your inability to buy a home. And to quote myself again from this Substack piece, if you were interested in a deeper analysis of power with citations, I do have a piece. But I said, when Patricia Hill Collins wrote about the matrix of domination, she was describing the organization of power as structural, interpersonal, disciplinary, and hegemonic. She argues that privilege and oppression do not operate independently. Identities, experiences, and knowledge generation have to be understood holistically, not as isolated events. Oppressions are not just interconnected, they are interdependent and have to be contextualized historically and sociopolitically. As Nancy Fraser has written, quote, social reproduction is an indispensable background condition for the possibility of economic production in a capitalist society, end quote. Marx and many of his followers ignore the relations of social reproduction. This is evidenced by the ways in which labor and worker are defined and applied, despite society's functioning on the unpaid labor of women's work. Fraser articulated in Contradictions of Capital and Care how capitalism has intensified, not invented, socialized gendered differences and modernized masculine domination. I think that's really important to keep in mind. And I think that in one of my favorite books, The Feminist Theory Reader, they have a section titled Theorizing Intersectionality and Systems of Oppression. And it's really important to read because it gives a good look at how we need to conceptualize relational systems of difference and injustice, right? In that section, they talk about how Marx ignored the relations of social reproduction. Society functions because of things like women's unpaid labor. And they discuss, again, how Marx viewed labor and how he defines worker and how so many people were written outside of these definitions. And yet, it is still materially happening, right? The materialists and all of that. Like, these things are still very much present. Chattel slavery and the ways that bodies are racialized are essential to capitalist functioning. And it's paid no mind. We don't blink at somebody with Nazi symbolism on their body. You know, quite revealing, but also on brand. So, Graham Platner, we are not surprised.